Hey everyone, this is FIDE Master Kostya Kavutskiy here once again for Chess.com, and today I'll be showing you more highlights from the 2014 Tata Steel Super Tournament held in Wijk, the Netherlands. And last time we saw a couple of nice games, one win by Aronian, who, as I mentioned, won the tournament by quite a large margin, and a tactical shootout that was won by Hikaru Nakamura against up-and-coming Grandmaster Richard Rapport. Today, our first game here is between Grandmasters Fabiano Caruana playing white against Boris Gelfand playing black. And this game came from round one, and I really like this following game because Caruana showed some very fine attacking skills. As we can see here, black's king is quite vulnerable. He only has the g6 pawn as cover, and that pawn is quite weak. And white's king also seems exposed, but as we'll see, Fabiano played very precisely to seize the initiative and was able to launch a very decisive attack. This light-scored bishop, will also come into play here because black has no light-scored bishop, and so black's light squares end up being really, really weak, and this bishop is put to good use. And I would strongly recommend you guys try and find each and every move before I play it, kind of as if you were playing solitaire chess, because I think Caruana's moves were quite instructive. Of course, you can pause the video at any time if you want to think for a little bit longer, and if you try to guess white's moves, it will definitely improve your attacking skills here. So here Caruana played the move rook f2. Really, really strong idea. He's simply getting his rook to the g file where it's going to put pressure on g6 and attack black's king. And indeed, that's what would happen if, let's say, black played something like knight f8. We would play rook g2 followed by bishop d3, and this pawn would be practically impossible to defend. So Gelfand here took an interesting decision. He decided to play the move bishop g5. And it seems like trading the dark-scored bishops here is definitely a controversial decision. On one hand, black gets rid of white's two bishops advantage, and white would only be left with one bishop, but on the other hand, all the dark squares around black's king would suddenly be considerably weaker. So it's definitely up for question whether this was a good defensive move or not. In any case, Caruana continued with his plan, and he played rook g2. Gelfand traded bishops and played knight df8. And the good thing about Gelfand's decision is that at least he now has some squares for his queen, such as f6, and maybe he can build some compact defense, such as putting his rook on g7 and things like that. But Caruana simply wouldn't let that happen. And here he played the move bishop d3. So he wants to grab the g6 pawn and checkmate the black king. And now if black played a move like queen f6, I think white can think about maybe even the simple moves such as rook f1. Just defending the f3 pawn and threatening all kinds of things, like queen takes b6, for instance, is something that white can play and have a pretty much winning position here. White doesn't necessarily have to crash through on the queen side. If they can pick up 3 pawns with their queen, then that will definitely be good enough for the win. So Gelfand decided to play rook a7, which is a very tricky defensive idea. And his point is that if Caruana decided to take this pawn on g6, then after knight takes g6, rook takes g6, and rook g7, black is getting ready to trade a bunch of pieces off, and maybe Gelfand was looking for some kind of endgame where he's down a pawn but can perhaps hold it since some of white's pawns are weak, and with the reduced material, black would definitely have better chances to draw. Although I do think white would have still decent winning chances, I like what Caruana did because he simply kept the pressure on Gelfand and didn't cash in too soon. Instead, he basically went for the whole thing. Here Caruana played the move rook f1. And this might not necessarily be the strongest move in the position, but it's a very, very good move in that it's simply improving his position. He's defending this f3 pawn in case he needs it for the future, and he's also, in some cases, might want to bring this other rook to f2 where it could support the attack, eventually coming to the g or h files. Maybe at some point he wants to play king f2 and then bring the other rook in to g1 or h1 this way. Either way, it's a good solid move and it improves his rook. Gelfand played rook f7 and queen h6. course, it's always nice to have your queen as close to the opponent's king as possible, and here the queen can't really be disturbed on h6, and it's becoming a really, really dangerous piece. Gelfand played king h8, and once again he would love for Caruana to capture the g6 pawn, because then he could start trading some pieces. Knight takes, rook takes, and something like queen e7, and I don't think white has any immediate win here. And in fact, it looks like black might be getting out alive here. Rook g7 is the idea, to trade some pieces again, and of course white cannot take the d6 pawn, because after something like rook g8 check, it looks like maybe black is going to take over the initiative here. Rook g6, black of course trades rooks and plays rook g7. So this would obviously be white's nightmare in this position. And like I said before, Caruana chooses not to cash in too early and plays a really nice move here. Of course, a good attacking principle to remember is that you always want all of your pieces involved in the attack, and here you've probably already guessed the move is knight d2. He's bringing the knight to e4 and eventually to g5, where it's going to put a lot of pressure on black's position, and after this move, black's position is pretty much on the verge of collapse, and indeed Gelfand was not able to defend this in the next coming moves. He played rook f4, which is a pretty decent idea to play rook h4 and kick the queen out, and Caruana played rook g4, simply stopping black's idea, controlling the h4 square, and inviting black to trade rooks. Now if rook takes g4, f takes g4, of course rook f7 is a very menacing threat. Black really only has one chance here. He has to play queen g5, and although he's able to force a trade of queens here, this endgame would be very, very good for white, probably winning by force. After a move like knight c4, black is simply losing at least one pawn here. He can play b5, knight takes d6, and rook d8, but for one, this knight isn't really hanging because the f8 knight is hanging, but also white has this move here, knight e4, taking advantage of black's hanging knight on g5, and if black takes, white will recapture the bishop, and with an extra pawn and rook coming to f6, very strong bishop, this endgame is quite trivially winning for white. All of black's pawns are weak, and black's pieces are fairly passive, so this would not be hard for white to win at all. So seeing that the endgame was pretty much hopeless after rook takes g4, Gelfand played the move b5, which is quite reasonable since the a6 pawn is hanging in some lines, as well as the b6 pawn. Now he is probably preparing to play rook takes g4 followed by queen g5, but of course Caruana's next move prevents that, and that is knight e4, controlling the g5 square, and a rook takes g4, f takes g4 would be pretty hopeless since rook f7 is coming next, as well as knight f6, and okay, the game is pretty much over. All of white's pieces are just too active, and black's king is just not going to survive this. At the very least, white will end up winning the g6 pawn, probably the d6 pawn, and it's just really, really bad here for black. So Gelfand didn't capture on g4, and instead played the move knight d7. And this is definitely a losing move, but it's already hard to recommend here something for black. I mean, maybe a move like rook e7 would make sense to defend the 7th rank, but white can simply just capture on f4 already and happily take this pawn. d6 is falling. I mean, with an extra pawn and still a monster attack, I don't think white would have any problems winning here. Of course, the other rook can always join the attack through f2, like I mentioned before, and then h2. And again, black is just suffering without a pawn and getting mated, so the game really wouldn't last much longer anyways. But as it happened, knight d7 was played, rook takes g6, threatening the very annoying queen g7 checkmate. Gelfand tried rook g8, and after Caruana's next move, he simply resigned. So if you want to quickly pause the video and try to find it, it's a good tactics problem for you guys. And the right move was knight g5, threatening queen takes h7 mate, and black simply has no defense. He's getting mated within the next 2 moves or so. So a really nice game by Caruana. I thought he built up his attack very efficiently and precisely, and showed that he's capable of playing quite a brilliant game, against a world-class player such as Boris Gelfand. Thanks a lot for tuning in and watching this video on YouTube. If you want to see the rest of the video, then do head on over to the main site, Chess.com, sign up to be a member, and then you can watch the full feature-length video. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.